As of last month, Forbes counted the Rockefeller family tied for 45th on its list of the richest families in America, worth an estimated $12.5 billion. Once, that fortune belonged to one man. It now belongs to the seventh generation, an estimated 200 and more descendants, sharing what a single Rockefeller once held alone. 54 families made that list. Together, they are worth $1.9 trillion. This is the story of the largest fortune ever assembled in America and how it came apart. Not in a crash, not in a scandal that emptied the vaults. The Rockefellers did not go broke. Look at that list again, and they seem richer than ever. And yet something did vanish. At its height, one man's wealth was a measurable share of the entire American economy. Today, spread across 200 heirs, that share has all but disappeared, better than 97% of it gone. The money multiplied, the concentration died. This is how a fortune that size comes undone, on purpose. You have likely heard the number. John D. Rockefeller, the richest man in American history, worth $400 billion. It is a real figure, and it needs one correction, because the correction is the whole point. $400 billion is not what Rockefeller had in the bank. It is what his fortune would be worth if it commanded the same share of the American economy today. In his own time, measured in real dollars, his wealth reached a lifetime peak of $900 million in 1913. $900 million. Set against the economy of that year, it was just over 2% of everything the United States produced. 2 cents of every dollar an entire country earned, held in one pair of hands. So which is the real number? Both are. And here's the part the myth leaves out. The honest figure is not smaller than the legend. It is worse. Because even that $900 million is gone, and unlike every other fortune we have followed on this channel, it did not vanish by accident. He died leaving an estate of $26 million. He had already moved the rest. So what happened? This is the puzzle. There was no stock market crash that wiped them out. There was no swindler, no scandal, no bad marriage that carried the money off. Taxes took their share, a great deal of it, but taxes are not what ended this fortune. Nothing was done to the Rockefellers that they did not first do to themselves. The largest fortune in America was taken apart by the very people who built it, according to a plan. The question is why? And the plan had an instrument. In 1934, a set of trusts was signed, paper drawn with such care that it would outlive every person who put a name to it and govern the fortune long after they were gone. Remember the trusts. Almost everything the family became was written into them before it happened. To understand the plan. Now watch how fast he did it. In 1870, Standard Oil refined about 1/10 of America's oil. Then came the campaign historians still call the Cleveland Massacre. Between the 17th of February and the 28th of March, 1872, 40 days, Rockefeller bought out 22 of his 26 competitors in the city. Part of his leverage was a fearsome railroad scheme called the South Improvement Company, and it is worth being exact about it because the legend gets it wrong. That company never shipped a single barrel and never collected a rebate under its own name. Its power was wholly the threat of it, and the threat was enough. By 1877, only 5 years past the massacre, the 38-year-old Rockefeller controlled close to 90% of all the oil refined in the United States. In 1882, he bound it together into a single trust, a $70 million enterprise holding 90% of the nation's refineries and pipelines. And the pipelines are the part to notice, because they were the arteries every rival needed to move a single barrel at all. A competitor did not lose to Standard Oil in the open market. He woke one morning to find that the roads his product had to travel already belonged to the man he was trying to beat, and that no open market was left. A journalist named Ida Tarbell would fire at him across 19 separate installments and close to 3 years in the pages of a magazine, and the public learned to call his company the Octopus. But by then the octopus had closed its grip. One man, in a little over a decade, had taken 1/10 of an industry and made it 9/10. Put a number on what that was worth. At its peak, in 1913, Rockefeller's personal fortune reached $900 million. The scale of it is hard to hold in the mind. 70,000 people drew their wages from the companies that carried his name. His refineries and his pipelines moved the fuel of an industrializing country, barrel after barrel, day after day. That was more than a great fortune. It was a measurable share of the whole national economy. And that, the very peak of it, the summit, is the moment the government chose to step in. Because a fortune that size does not go noticed. In Washington, they had been watching Standard Oil for years. In 1906, the federal government sued to break Standard Oil apart under the antitrust law. The case ground upward through the courts for years, all the way to the Supreme Court, where, because one justice died and the makeup of the bench changed, the arguments had to be heard twice. Everyone understood what was coming. The one open question was what the ruling would order the great oil trust to do. Step back from the courtroom for a moment, because the antitrust suit is not what took the fortune down. Consider what a fortune of this size is. It is not a pile of money that sits and waits. It is a machine. And a machine needs an operator. Rockefeller built his out of the discipline in that little red ledger. The counting, the caution, the refusal to waste a cent. A fortune this large survives across time only if every generation makes someone willing to do the same thing. To guard it, to grow it, to re-earn it. That is rare in one man. It is rarer still in a son, and rarer again in a grandson. Sooner or later, a family runs out of Rockefellers, and this family, more than any other, understood that in advance and chose to do something about it. By the time the verdict came, Rockefeller had handed daily control to his only son. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, on the 15th of May, 1911, the Chief Justice of the United States, Edward White, told a sleepy courtroom, "I have also to announce the opinion of the court in number 398, the United States against the Standard Oil Company." For the next 49 minutes, he read aloud a 20,000-word opinion in a voice so low the other justices had to lean over and ask him to speak up. The order was final. Standard Oil was to be broken into pieces, given 6 months to spin off its parts, its officers forbidden to put the monopoly back together. In all, the decision split the trust into 34 separate companies. Rockefeller did not fight it. To his old partners, he sent a note that read like an obituary. "Dearly beloved," it began, "we must obey the Supreme Court. Our splendid, happy family must scatter." They obeyed. That is the part everyone remembers. Here is the part almost no one does. When the pieces began trading on their own, at the end of 1911, they soared. Standard Oil of New Jersey climbed from 360 to 595 in 10 months. The New York Company went from 260 to 580. The Indiana Company ran from 3,500 to 9,500. Rockefeller had owned a quarter of the whole. In 1911, his fortune stood at $300 million. By 1913, it stood at $900 million. The breakup had tripled it. Theodore Roosevelt, whose own administration had brought the case, watched it happen, and said the companies were still under the same control, or at least working in such close alliance that the effect is precisely the same. The order had been obeyed to the letter. Its purpose had been ignored, and the president said so out loud. Here is where the plan becomes visible. Watch the money move. In 1934, with Washington raising the taxes on great fortunes once again, the estate tax climbing toward 60%, and the tax on large gifts toward 45%, John D. Rockefeller Jr. set up a series of trusts for his wife and children. The design is the whole story. That money would be managed by the trust department of a bank and by hand-picked trustees. The children could draw the income, but the principal they could not touch. That took a trustee's approval. In all, Jr. moved $102 million to his family through those trusts, and because his own most trusted men sat among the trustees, he never let go of the controls. But the giving had begun a generation earlier, and one piece of paper tells it best. On a single day in 1920, the old man sent his son a note. It opened, "Dear son, I am this day giving you," and then the figure, $65 million in United States government bonds, and it closed with a father's affection and his name. $65 million, moved with a single sentence and no ceremony. That was the method. By the time Sr. died, in 1937, almost nothing was left to inherit, an estate of just $26 million, most of the rest given away long before. He had spent his last decades handing the fortune out the door on purpose. And here's the strange thing about how the Rockefellers spent their money. They spent enormous amounts of it giving it away. Start with Sr. Between 1856 and 1909, John D. Rockefeller gave away more than $150 million. He put $100 million into the Rockefeller Foundation in its first year alone, and tens of millions more in the years that followed. Across his lifetime, he gave away better than $500 million, and some $450 million of that went into medicine. By 1919, he had given away as much as Andrew Carnegie gave in a whole lifetime, and he would give away much more before he died. And a quieter fact sits folded inside all that generosity. When he secured the foundation's charter in 1913, he placed a large part of his wealth beyond the reach of the inheritance tax. For good. The charity and the tax shelter were one act. He said as much himself. To a reporter, in 1914, as the new income tax took hold, he put it in the plainest terms. When a man has accumulated a sum of money, accumulated it within the law, the government has no right to share in its earnings. That is worth holding on to, because it is the honest frame of this whole story. The money was not lost. It was moved, on purpose, into places the tax collector and the spendthrift heir could not follow. His son carried it further and further still. Between 1917 and 1960, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave away $537 million in direct gifts, and another $540 million through the family's organized philanthropies. He paid $317 million in taxes to federal, state, and local governments. He paid them, he did not dodge them. And when the counting was done, this man, born to the largest fortune in the country, was left with about $200 million. The rest had gone out into the world with his name on it. He is a man you can picture. During the Depression, Rockefeller Center, Jr. built Rockefeller Center in the heart of Manhattan, and he ran it with a command he had never shown in any money-making venture, arriving by 8 each morning with a golden 5-foot ruler wedged into his back pocket, unrolling the blueprints on the floor, and crawling about on his hands and knees to take the measurements himself. Building in the depths of the Depression carried one great advantage. Labor and materials were cheap, and the project put 75,000 union tradesmen to work when work was almost impossible to find. 14 buildings rose from the site, the towers among them climbing 850 feet into the air. Here was the heir to the largest fortune in America, down on the floor with a ruler, raising a city block that gave a small army of men their wages. Then came the third generation, Junior's 5 sons, and the money split among them. One of them, Nelson, would spend his life reaching for political power. Another, David, would outlive every one of them, the last of the 6. We will come back to what became of them. For now, hold the pattern in view. 2 generations in, the Rockefellers had turned the largest private fortune in American history into a great foundation, a fortune given over to medicine, a city center, and a tax structure, and they had done it on purpose, year upon year, dollar upon dollar. Every dollar that went out the door was a dollar no heir could waste and no tax could seize. The dissolution the Supreme Court could not accomplish, the family was accomplishing on its own. Ask yourself, before we go on, if a family left you a fortune you could draw income from but never touch, never sell, never spend it down, would you feel rich? Or would you feel like a caretaker of money that was never quite yours? Nelson Rockefeller wanted to be president of the United States, and he had the fortune to chase it. He is the clearest example of what the third generation did with the money, which was more and more to turn it into something other than money. Nelson took his $12 million share of the family trusts and spent his life in public office. He won election as governor of New York not once, but 4 times. He built and spent on a scale no ordinary politician could match, pouring the family's resources into campaigns, into art, into the machinery of ambition. Again and again, he reached for the Republican presidential nomination. Again and again, it slipped from his hands. He spent a fortune chasing it, and the prize he wanted most, the fortune could not buy him. And then the office came to him another way. Nelson Rockefeller became Vice President of the United States under President Gerald Ford, the second highest office in the land, a grandson of Standard Oil, and the presidency itself now one step away. And still, it was not the office he had spent his life chasing. He rose no higher. He died in 1979. That is what the money became in the third generation. Not a business to run, but a platform to stand on. Rockefeller had built a fortune by making something the country needed. His grandson spent that fortune trying to become something the country would choose. One of those paths compounds, the other one only spends. And a fortune that is spent, however grand the manner, is a fortune on its way out the door. Now do the division, because this is where the fortune goes. Follow the arithmetic of descent. One man, in 1913, held $900 million, the whole fortune, in a single pair of hands. One generation on, in 1934, that money was split. $102 million divided among a wife and 6 children, locked into trusts. 2 generations on, by the middle of the 1990s, the descendants of John D. Rockefeller were together worth more than $6 billion. And today, the 7th generation, an estimated 200 and more heirs, shares a fortune Forbes counts at $12.5 billion. Look at those numbers, because they do something you would not expect. They go up. 900 million to 6 billion to 12.5 billion. In plain dollars, the family has never been richer. And that is the trap. Because while the dollar total climbed, the thing that made Rockefeller, the concentration, one man commanding a measurable slice of the whole American economy, was being divided and divided and divided again. Compounding division does to a great fortune what no stock market crash ever managed. It dissolves it. And it does so while the numbers on the page are still going up. But money does strange things to the people who are born holding it. And not every Rockefeller was built to carry it. Consider Winthrop, another of Junior's sons. He was the one the structure could not seem to fix. Yale threw him out after a scandal at a speakeasy. He went down to Texas and spent 3 years as a roustabout in the oil fields, laboring in the very industry his grandfather had founded, drinking hard, and, by one reporter's account, handling all the nightlife the oil towns had to offer. In 1948, he married a blonde divorcee named Barbara Sears, known as Bobo, born Giavute Paulechiute. The marriage did not last the year. Here was a grandson of the richest man in America, handed every advantage money could arrange, and unable to find the ground beneath his own feet. And then he did something none of the fortunes planning had produced. He moved to Arkansas, entered politics on his own account, and in 1966 he won the governorship of the state, the first Republican to take that office there in 94 years. The heir the money could not steady went out and won the one thing the money could never have bought him. You can watch the great assets leave one by one. Keikuit, the family's grand estate above the Hudson, had been the seat of the Rockefellers for generations. When Nelson died in 1979, his will handed a 1/3 interest in it to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. In time, the house that had been the family's private world would open its doors to paying tourists, and the crown jewel went too. The family sold a controlling 80% of Rockefeller Center to a Japanese conglomerate in 1989, and by the year 2000 it belonged to Tishman Speyer outright. Its name stayed carved on the building. The family did not. So here's the answer to the puzzle. In 1913, one Rockefeller held a fortune equal to just over 2% of the entire American economy. Today, the whole family, 200 plus heirs, 7th generation, $12.5 billion, holds about 4/100ths of 1% of it. 98% of the concentration that once made this family a power in the land is gone. Not by theft, not by ruin, but divided and given away until the greatest fortune America ever produced had thinned to a sliver. And now you can see what happened here, because it is not quite what the title promises. The Rockefeller fortune was not lost. Nobody gambled it away. No court seized it. No fool of an heir ran it into the ground. It was dissolved. with care and by design, by the two men who understood it best, poured out into foundations and trusts and tax structures faster than any heir could spend it or any government could take it. They took the one thing that destroys every great fortune, the passage of time, across careless generations, and they turned it into a tool. They dissolved the concentration on purpose. And that is the reason the machine outlived the money. Because that is the twist this whole story has been building toward. The fortune came apart. The machine did not. Start with the trusts. Those instruments Junior signed in 1934 were built to last, and last they did. The design held just as drawn. The heirs could draw the income, and the principal stayed locked behind the trustees, out of reach of any one Rockefeller's bad judgment or bad marriage. Here was a structure meant to protect the money from the very people who inherited it, and it worked. The whole point was that no one generation could ever spend it away, because no one generation was ever handed the keys. And look at what else still stands with the name carved on it. The Rockefeller Foundation, chartered in 1913, endures. Hundreds of millions of the old man's money went into medicine, and that work is still going on. The fortune that paid for all of it is scattered now across 200 heirs, but the institutions it built outlasted it, just as they were meant to. That is the pattern beneath every receipt in this final act. The money leaves, and the thing the money made remains. Then there is the family office. From 1933, the Rockefellers ran their money from a single suite high inside Rockefeller Center, room 5600, on the 56th floor, a private office that managed nothing in the world but Rockefeller wealth. That office still stands, but it has become something its founders would not know. Around 2014, the family moved out, its staff cut from some 200 people down to a few dozen, and a few years after, in 2018, the operation folded into a new firm, Rockefeller Capital Management, that opened its doors to outside money and now oversees more than $150 billion for clients who are not Rockefellers at all. The family kept a minority stake in it and no more. The private office that once served a single fortune had become a business the family no longer controls, and that, too, is the dissolution still running. Then comes the sharpest irony of them all. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund is a charity built, dollar for dollar, on Standard Oil money, an endowment of about $1.33 billion, the direct descendant of the Standard Oil fortune itself. And in September of 2014, that fund announced it was getting out of oil. It would divest from fossil fuels, pulling its money in stages out of the coal and the tar sands, and, over the years that followed, out of the industry that had built it. The heirs of the man who cornered American oil had decided that oil was no longer a thing they wished to own. There is no cleaner picture of a fortune outliving the thing that made it. Standard Oil money, turning its back on Standard Oil. And then there was David. David Rockefeller, grandson of the founder, was the last of his line in a particular sense. He was the last surviving grandchild of John D. Rockefeller Sr., the last of Junior's 6 children left alive. When he died, in March of 2017, he was 101 years old, and Forbes put his own fortune at $3.3 billion. With him, the generation that had known the old man in the flesh, that had grown up inside the fortune at its height, came to its end. What happened next is the whole story in a single image. David Rockefeller had spent a lifetime collecting art, paintings, furniture, porcelain, more than 2,000 objects, some of the finest things in private hands anywhere in the world. And when he died, all of it went to auction. In the spring of 2018, Christie's sold the David Rockefeller collection over a run of sales that brought in more than $830 million, the most valuable auction of a single private collection ever held. And here's the part that matters. Not $1 of it stayed in the family. Every cent of the proceeds, all $830 million and more, went to charity, to a list of institutions the Rockefellers chose themselves. The Museum of Modern Art, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, Rockefeller University, the Council on Foreign Relations, the American Farmland Trust, and others besides. Think about what that means. The last grandchild of the richest man in American history died, and his possessions were gathered up and sold for the better part of $1 billion, and the family let every cent of it walk out the door. In 2018, more than a century after John D. Rockefeller began giving his fortune away, the dissolution he started was still running. It never stopped. That is the thing to understand about this family. They did not lose the money the way most great fortunes are lost, in carelessness and misfortune, a mansion and a ruined heir at a time. With both hands, on purpose, across 100 years, the Rockefellers gave it away and built institutions meant to outlast every dollar. The concentration is gone. The machine is still turning, and the name is worth more now than the money ever was. So think back to where we started. One man once held a fortune equal to more than 2% of everything his country produced. Today his blood runs in more than 200 people, and among them they hold a story, a name, and a place in the 40s on a list. The fortune did not survive. What survived was the structure the family built around it. The foundations, the trusts, the institutions, the name over the door. The Rockefellers proved something the other great dynasties never learned. The surest way to keep a fortune forever is to give it away. John D. Rockefeller Jr., explaining the trusts to his son Lawrence, wrote, "As you know, Grandfather and I have always been keenly alive to the responsibilities inherent in the possession of wealth. He believes, as I do, that these responsibilities and the opportunities which they bring for useful living and unselfish service to mankind should be shared with those of the next generation when, and as soon as they have reached such an age and attained such a maturity as justifies their being entrusted with them.